From September 25, 2010 through January 16, 2011, the Hudson River Museum presents Paintbox Leaves Autumnal Inspiration from Cold to Wyeth. This unique exhibition features more than 100 paintings which highlight the singular beauty of the American autumn. Artists featured include Thomas Cole, Albert Bierstadt, Winslow Homer, Maxfield Parrish, as well as Andrew Jamie and N.C. Wyeth. The exhibition was curated by Bartholomew Bland and Laura Buchels, who complemented wall texts for the paintings with autumn-inspired poetry.
So you wouldn't have a show without autumnal inspiration, without Thomas Cole, who is considered the father of the Hudson River School. Can you tell me a little bit about this piece?
Thomas Cole, really the sort of great, grand old man of the Hudson River School, was actually born in England, so he was very aware, I think, of the American autumn. He went back to England in the early 1830s, and this is one of the paintings he painted shortly after he returned to America, in which his sense of autumn was much more heightened, I think, than previously. He had returned to England, which had a much browner kind of autumn. It didn't have the big strands of old hardwood forest that you were seeing up in the Hudson Valley and the Adirondacks and the Catskills. Most of it had been chopped down in the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries. And there weren't the huge groupings of maples, the sugar maples in particular, so you don't have all those vivid reds. But this painting in particular, which was done in 1834, and depicts Hoosick Mountain and Pontoosic Lake up in the Berkshires, and it has a lot of the elements of classic Cole. You've got your cows here in the foreground, the fallen tree that's been cut down, a little bit of a memento mori, feeling that life does end. There's sort of reflection on mortality. There's the little tiny church that you see in the distance with a little tiny white steeple. Often references of Christianity are woven into Cole's work. And then there are the little people. In this case, there are some fishermen and a man on the bank waving his hat. And Cole would usually place some of these very small figures in the foreground of his paintings to sort of give a sense of the grandeur of nature and the grandeur of the landscape. And that probably brings us to Albert Bierstadt, the very large canvas that we're standing in front of. It's entitled Autumn Woods, very prosaically. It's from 1886, and it's one of Bierstadt's really most beautiful works. I think it's one of his masterpieces. It belongs to the New York Historical Society. It's nature's chapel. It's very calming. We've got a bench in here in the gallery. A lot of people come and they just sit and sort of absorb this picture. Bierstadt was a later Hudson River School painter, and I think of all the painters, he's one of my very favorites, and he also has, I think, the sort of saddest story. Late in his life, he was very technically, obviously wonderful, painting these huge canvases, but he really sort of went out of fashion, the way a lot of the Hudson River School painters did. He couldn't sell his work. This painting, along with a dozen others, were displayed in London at the annual exhibition there. None of them sold. He had a studio here in Westchester that burned down. His wife died. He had a lot of misfortune later in life. And this picture, which was painted up near his wife's home in Waterville, New York, is not what we think of in terms of those Rocky Mountain pictures. It's much more serene. It's not swirling clouds. It's not storms approaching that you see in Thomas Cole's work. It's just it's an older man's, I think, sort of reverie and sort of coming to terms with life.
Several paintings depict the peak weeks of October and evoke a sense of exhilaration. The paintings of November and early December, by contrast, can evoke a more thoughtful and meditative state.
Contemporary artists, like their earlier counterparts, use the autumn scene to convey emotion, and I really like this piece for that, the sense of late fall solitude that's being conveyed here.
Yes, this is a work by Deborah Birmingham, and it was done just last year. It's a beautiful example, I think, of that the elements of the bleak autumn in the tree that's lost most of its leaves. It's just got some tiny little highlights, perhaps of a vine growing up, and then combining that with this brilliant blue sky. It sort of brings about the idea of Indian summer, which was a cultural concept in the 19th century of the moment in autumn after the first frost, where you would get these beautiful sun-filled days, often with these beautiful, very autumn landscapes, that Europeans also discussed very much as being a specifically American phenomenon.
And a forerunner to this was perhaps tonalism.
Yes, they were all inspired by the French Barbizon painters, this idea of bleakness. And one of the reasons I think American art shifted at that time is because so many Americans began studying in Paris. They were spending longer and longer time studying at the French academies. They were going out into the French countryside, which, like the English countryside, was much browner than the American wilderness at this time of year. And so there was a greater appreciation of this sort of the bleak autumn, and this sort of tonalism comes out of that Barbizon movement.
The Paintbox Leaves exhibition reminds us that though the season of autumn may be fleeting, its power to inspire is eternal.
The autumn is really a wonderful lens or prism to look at a lot of the trends that have happened in American art. Sort of like the seasons, there are cycles. What's popular, what goes in and out of fashion, brilliant colors, the brilliancy, the cheerfulness that is in so much autumn was popular at one time. The bleakness, the sadness, the reverence, the reminiscence, the nostalgia that runs all the way through autumn was sort of gained prominence at another time. Now I think that contemporary artists are looking at autumn and trying to wonder what kind of cultural symbolism they can draw out of what's contemporary. It's been a great privilege, and we've been very grateful to the Horowitz Foundation and all of our supporters. When it all comes together and you see 100+ beautiful works that are really very sensuous in a very concentrated way, I think it gives you a whole new perspective on the subject matter.